Hello and welcome everyone. We are going to review the content for this week. This will be a relatively short video compared to perhaps the others that will come along, just because I don't want to overwhelm you with content within this first week. So we are going to review some general tips and tricks of how to be successful, the actual introduction to psychology, that idea of psychology as a science, as well as thinking critically when reading psychology articles and just thinking about psychology as a whole. Okay. Let's see here. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about how to be successful. So an important part of having the lecture or reading or listening or reading this lecture with the closed captions is to take notes. I'm not going to provide any sort of PowerPoint just because I am providing them right here, and you will learn that it is easier and more helpful to listen to these lectures because sometimes I don't put everything on the PowerPoint, so I have to explain what the thought process is and why this concept is important, and you will need to know that information in order to complete the quizzes as well as the assignments. So I know this is not a structured remote class, so we will not have required class lectures. So this is optional to listen to, but I highly recommend that you do because I will pull all the information into this lecture. So an idea of how to take notes during lecture, just write down the PowerPoints, write down the important things that I talk about in the PowerPoints. Read the content that we go over during the week in the weekly content section. There are numerous resources to use. I know the Writing Center is having a field day right now, and they are up and running and ready to accept clients to come in and have them read their papers. So please reach out and do what you need to do in order to get a good grade, and not that just this class, but any of your other classes as well. Please ask me if you have any questions. I will have a question and answer form for general questions, but if you are at all wanting to talk to me personally, we can text, we can email, and also voice call if needed. And if you're worried about your grade or if there's something going on, I mean, we're in the middle of COVID times, please just communicate. I'm always flexible with students who are communicating with me, what's happening and what they need me to do and need me to help them with. Okay. So now we're going to talk a little bit about psychology and the definition of psychology. So psychology is the scientific study of mental activity and behavior. So it's this concept of this mental capacity to think, and as well as behavior, often linked with what is going on in our mental, in the mental activity that we end up using. So all of this is based on brain processes. So you have this mental activity which can be thought of as thoughts, feelings, emotions, anything that can't be physically touched and is going on in your body. Then there's behavior, social interactions, talking, physical contact. So in that way, these two things kind of come together in order to form this general definition of psychology. So it also has another part of it, and this is just the science. So this idea of inferring mental processes from behaviors that are observed, recorded, and measured. This is this idea of science versus armchair speculation. So it's the science section of this is taking it a step further and saying we infer mental processes from behaviors that are observed, recorded, and measured. So what does scientific mean? How can we know that something is true? What are some of the characteristics of scientific thought? These are all questions that we will ask ourselves and then answer in the following slides. So one point to make is that we will be using critical thinking skills to evaluate different statements or theories, which links right back to what scientific means. So we will be evaluating theories and statements. Who wrote it? How did they get to this conclusion? When was it written? Understanding the similarities and differences between statements is essential to our ability to accurately evaluate the trustworthiness of various claims. And this is important when we are talking about psychology, because often, such as pop psychology and in psychology today, there will be flashing headlines of new study found that people who get tattoos have low self-esteem. Okay, so where did they get this statement from? Where did they get this idea from? Did they actually research and have a research or lab where they completed this? Was it from self-reported questionnaires, or was it just a narrative? Was it anecdotal? So these kind of thoughts are and questions are what we will be using moving forward so that we can evaluate these different psychological claims and think for ourselves of what does all this mean? All right. So we can't talk about the scientific method and just the idea of critical thinking without talking about Karl Popper. So he suggested that science can be distinguished from pseudoscience or just everyday reasoning. You know, we use everyday reasoning when we are doing day-to-day stuff. But when it's something that we are going to apply to everyone, such as maybe a medication, we have to go through the appropriate steps in order to say it's safe for everyone. Or people who don't have these specific side effects or those types of things. So, and this is because scientific claims are capable of being falsified. So falsified means to prove false. So we can differentiate something from pseudoscience because we can test whether this claim is true or not true. So this kind of solution to the problem of what is this idea of science? If science showed all the possibilities that were not true, we would be only left with what is true. So this idea of testing and retesting and seeing, which medication is useful for schizophrenia, or what sort of treatment method should be used with someone who has borderline personality disorder, or just the everyday concepts. Is drinking 8 cups of water good for you? Is it good for everyone? So just having these sort of measures and being able to test this, it can help us move forward and make a good theory, which is what we ultimately do. Science. So what makes a good theory? So good theories describe, explain, and predict in a way that can be empirically tested and potentially falsified. So let's say you are working on an experiment in regards to treatment options for borderline personality disorder. And so you come up with this idea that this specific therapy is good with borderline personality disorder people who have this disorder. So then you test it. Maybe you have 100 participants who have this therapy, and then maybe a self-reported questionnaire before and after. Okay, so then after you do probably 5 to 10 to 15 of these same tests, maybe with different populations, different groups of people, and it all seems to show that this specific therapy seems to improve more than other therapies with people who have borderline personality disorder, then this can go on to make a theory. So this theory is that this treatment option, this therapy, has been found to significantly improve the side effects of borderline personality disorder. So, good theories describe, explain, and predict in ways that can be empirically tested and potentially falsified. So that means that anyone can come along, do this exact same test, and have this exact same experiment, and potentially come up with results that prove that this is not a true theory. So it's this idea that any sort of theories or ideas that are presented and that have been grounded in research, if you have a different take on the research and perhaps you ask maybe a different sort of question, maybe you show that the theory that has been grounded in research is not true, and not true for a specific party, not true for a specific group of people, or just generally not true. And this has happened in psychology, where we will have something grounded in theory and practice, and something like when we are only drawing participants from wealthy white Americans, okay? And then we switch and we start encompassing everyone in the United States. So rich, poor, black, white, whatever it may be. And what it shows is often a varied spectrum of results, because everyone has a different experience, and this can we cannot say that one experience is true for all, because everyone has this different experience. So, and in that way, we often form our theories based on concepts that we test with participants. So if we have a different area, or we have a different construction of participants, then that will potentially have different results. Okay, so what about faith? So I am, there is nothing wrong with having faith. In fact, many students that I know and many people who I enjoy being around have this unshakable faith in God or Allah or whatever it may be. And that's important. But one thing that is often used is faith is often used as a way to put blinders on, as a way to ignore the actual science behind things. So faith in a lot of ways is similar to a personal experience and kind of your common sense understanding of the world. And that's entirely okay to have. But it is not okay to say, because of my faith, this theory is not true. It might not be true to you, might not personally ring true, but we cannot discredit the facts and the science that comes out of this. So this is just a little commentary on what people, what people believe in changes their outlook on science. And some of it is positive and some of it is not so positive. So definitely, if you have a strong faith of some sort, please talk about it, write about it in your critical thinking journals, write about it in your discussion. That's important to talk about and acknowledge. And I don't want anyone to feel that they can't do that. I just also want you to consider that there are certain things that is just grounded in science, and that's what we have to kind of inherently cling to. But faith definitely helps, especially with those unknowns. So science does have limitations. We cannot prove that something is 100% true 100% of the time. It's going back to that idea of being able to be falsified. So, there can always be someone who comes around and has an experiment and does something that proves a theory to be false. Okay. So we are going to review real quick the scientific method. So this is just a very straightforward way to think about how we get to these theories, how we get to these conclusions. So, and this is useful to reduce bias and error. If every single person follows the scientific method, then it is more likely to get appropriate results, versus if someone did these out of order or didn't follow the scientific method, then their research could have holes in it that doesn't really make sense. So the first part of the scientific method is to form a question. Question about the world around you, question about general psychology, question about yourself. So then from there you form a hypothesis, usually a hypothesis that kind of answers this question. So this must be happening because of that. A must be happening because of B. So then once we have this hypothesis kind of figured out in our minds and written down, and we test it. We can test it doing an experiment to test it. We can do, if it's not so able to be touched or handled in that way, then we may do it through surveys or collection of results from narratives, observation, any sort of thing like that. So then we test this hypothesis, and after that we report the results, and we see if the hypothesis is correct, then we report it, maybe see if other people have figured out the same thing, maybe see if there are other like-minded people or people who found these results to be true, have this as supporting material for them. But if the hypothesis is incorrect, then try again. And this is how all studies are completed. You know, if you didn't ask that right question or ask something that that you were able to find the results for. So this is definitely a long process, but it's worth it in the end to have a clear, straightforward way to test things. So understanding the limits of science, including its subjectivity and uncertainty, does not render it entirely useless. Because it is systematic, using testable, reliable data, it can allow us to determine the idea of causality, and it can help us generalize our conclusion. So with this research, we are able to often form very educated conclusions or very educated guesses on certain things, which is important. By understanding how these scientific conclusions are reached, we are better able and better equipped to use science as a tool of knowledge. So we're going to go on to this slide. Okay, so this is just another picture of the same thing, the cycle of the scientific method, going from the theory, use the theory to form a hypothesis, from the hypothesis, design a study to test it, and so you do the research, perform the research, then you have the observation. So you can create or modify the theory. Maybe you found something that didn't really make sense, so you kind of change the question a little bit, try it again, and see what the results are. So this is all I'm going to do for this session, just because I don't want to overwhelm you all. So please listen over this, and you will need it for your syllabus quiz if you choose to complete it. All right, have a wonderful day, and I'll see you guys soon.